Ladies and gentlemen, or as we should say for this segment, our fellow Americans, we're here to speak to the American people about an American movie on this edition of the Dissident Film Club. The film is, of course, called Top Gun Maverick. Made a little bit of news this week as the Oscar nominations came out. It was nominated for not just the technical awards like visual effects and best film editing, which it was expected to be nominated for, but also scored a best picture nomination along with a best adapted screenplay nomination. This movie obviously made a huge splash, grossing $1.48 billion at the box office, starring, of course, Tom Cruise there, directed by Joseph Kosinski, and co-written, one of the screenplay nominees, it's interesting, co-written by Christopher McQuarrie, who's famous for The Usual Suspects, which is considered one of the greatest written mystery crime thrillers of the past 50 years. He's also gotten a gig as essentially Tom Cruise's nearly permanent screenwriter. He wrote the screenplay for Valkyrie, also the Jack Reacher films, Edge of Tomorrow, and the Mission Impossible Rogue Nation movie. Joseph Kosinski was also a commercial director for a while. He'd shot some commercial videos, which is interesting because I think that certainly informs the sort of aesthetic of the movie. There are certain scenes that look like TV ads almost. But what we're here to talk about, more so than even the film itself, because the film is a very sort of straightforward, boilerplate Hollywood movie. But that's part of the reason why it did so well, because we've sort of exited the era of straightforward, boilerplate Hollywood movies. And I think, before I toss to you, Russ, my thesis is that the genius of this movie, which is sort of hidden in plain sight from a marketing point of view at least, is that this is the first blockbuster film in a while whose intended audience is simply the general public. Even the Marvel movies are not intended for the general public. Like, my father-in-law does not go out and watch the Marvel movies, right? This is really directed towards the average person.
Not
it's also a
Endgame?
movie. What's that?
Not even Endgame?
No, none of them.
No.
None of them. But this is also a movie that doesn't necessarily target the coveted 18 to 34 demographic. Not that young people weren't interested and didn't go see it, but because it's a sequel to a movie that came out 36 years ago, that inherently sparks interest among boomers, Gen Xers, and also military people, military enthusiasts, weapons system enthusiasts. There's a huge market for this kind of movie that just doesn't get catered to very often by either the Hollywood system or the independent film system, right, anymore. So go ahead.
I don't think there's any great mystery here, but it tells you how far up its own ass Hollywood has gotten that the success of this movie was such a shock. You have Tom Cruise, who I think you could credibly make the case is the last movie star.
Yes, I agree.
Maybe Brad Pitt.
I was going to say Brad Pitt, but not even Brad Pitt, man, because Brad Pitt does movies that don't do well, you know? That new movie that he was in, the Damien Chazelle movie, Babylon, about like early Hollywood. He's in that. It didn't really. No, you're right. Tom Cruise is the last true movie star whose name above the title guarantees you something at the box office. It's not going to bomb.
He has always had a kind of unerring ability to pick hits for himself, and they're not always obvious Mission Impossible kinds of things. His work in Magnolia was great.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah,
amazing. He's not talked about as much as an actor as he deserves. Now, to review this, I broke my rule, my not paying for Tom Cruise movies rule, which I've had ever since he started promoting Scientology publicly. I said, you know what? He's basically shut the fuck up about it ever since the Brooke Shields postpartum depression thing, which was not a good look for him, where he starts. I hesitate to use the word, but there's no other word for this particular case, where he starts mansplaining postpartum depression to Brooke Shields. And Brooke Shields, if there's ever been an America's sweetheart, it's Brooke Shields.
Oh yeah, right.
Exactly. So it was really not the person to pick that fight with your crazy spaceship religion.
Right.
But look, he's a smart guy. He's protective of his fame. He's protective of his career. He saw the pushback, and that he very quickly turned into a punchline because of that. For years after that, Tom Cruise was a punchline. He's finally kind of lived that down. The jumping on the Oprah couch image has finally subsided. And so, okay, I broke the rule. I paid to watch Maverick on Amazon Prime. I've called a truce. I mean, it's not like I won't watch something by anyone who's a member of any other crazy religion. I was just angry that he was promoting it as part of his career. But he stopped doing that for about 20 years now. So okay, Tom. I've always respected his talent. I'll call it truce. Tell me what Tom Cruise, aside from Scientology, tell me what Tom Cruise thinks about anything.
Right.
Doesn't talk about politics. I have no idea how he votes. I don't even know if he does vote. Does anybody? And you know what? Okay, you're right about Brad Pitt. But one of the reasons I think of Brad Pitt is because same deal. Tell me how Brad Pitt votes. These are the last of the people who came up in that Hollywood system where you don't talk about those things because you're a movie star. Your job is to appeal to everybody. Your job is to entertain, and it is going to interfere with your ability to entertain everybody if you associate yourself with causes outside of crack babies, which everyone can agree that's a wonderful thing to go help children who have been born to drug addicted mothers. Nobody's going to say liberal, conservative, right? That's
snowflake.
That's right. And traditionally, those are the kinds of causes Hollywood stars would get involved in. They'd go to impoverished countries and try to raise awareness and get donations for those countries, things that were really politically neutral, just like this movie, except insofar as a movie that glorifies the American war machine is inherently political. There's inherently a political element to that. But beyond that, beyond it just having that backdrop, it doesn't talk about politics. It doesn't make it clear what country they have to fly this mission into. They go back to the ABCs of storytelling, where Tom Cruise, his character, Maverick, has a conflict. He has demons. He has troubles psychologically that the external action is a metaphor for, and he resolves those psychological issues by conquering the physical obstacles that he encounters in the movie. This is very basic action movie 101. Hollywood forgot how to make this kind of movie because it got obsessed with pushing a social agenda at the expense of storytelling. Now, it is not that you can't do both of these things at the same time. I want to make that very clear. I'm not saying we need to go back to, we need more straight white male leads. That's what it's missing. And I want to show that the idea of cross gender and swapping out these characters, that's not new. We already had that agenda. We just didn't approach it in a way that undermined the essence of storytelling. So we have an image here. This is Starbuck, played by Katie Sackhoff. Now, the original Battlestar Galactica centered on these two kind of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker knockoff characters. And when they did a reboot in 2003, they decided to gender swap Starbuck and make that character very much what the Tom Cruise character is in Maverick. That's part of why it comes to mind. The troubled, always breaking the rules, chip on her shoulder, in this case, pilot, with a lot of personal demons, but incredible talent. And you know what? Yes, was there some questioning and some pushback from original Battlestar Galactica fans when they heard this? Yes, there was. You know how the show overcame that? Great writing, great storytelling, by building Starbuck as a compelling three-dimensional character. And that became this very beloved, iconic character of the show. Katie Sackhoff has gone on to be a successful sci-fi film actress because she has such a fan base in that arena because of Battlestar Galactica. These are the same exact people whose heads exploded at She-Hulk. So why? So why is that? Because Starbuck didn't act like she hated Apollo. If they did this now, Starbuck would be the most obnoxious character because also she wouldn't have demons. She would be perfect. Her problems would be the straight white men around her,
right,
and the way that they're trying to hold her down. And everyone would hate it. And they would take that as further evidence of how misogynistic everyone is. But 20 years ago, people were willing to accept this. If you did it well, the character's only conflict cannot be the patriarchy. The character has got to have meaningful demons. Under this rubric where you're trying to push this very two-dimensional political agenda, the woman can't have problems, right? Because women are perfect and their conflict is the world, right? Is the way society is structured. Their only problem is not recognizing their own power.
Right, exactly.
Starbuck is very much in the tradition of that cliched character. You know, she sleeps around, she smokes, she drinks, she gambles. They didn't play any of that down for her womanhood. You know what? It all worked. It all worked. So I say that to point out, I don't think Maverick works because a dude is the lead. I think Maverick works because they didn't have an agenda at all other than to tell a good story. Now, if you tell a good story, it's not that you can't have diversity. It's not that you can't try to change the typical casting for these things. But the story has to come first. And you can build the audience will accept pretty much anything if it's good. If it's good. Like if you really care about convincing people that these powerful positions don't have to be occupied by men, write a good story. It's the best way to convey it. That's how Battlestar Galactica did it 20 years ago, and it worked.
I mean, you could do anything well. You could do anything well. There's no concept too ridiculous or too unmarketable that can't be sold to people if it's done well. That animated movie, WALL-E, that came out years back. I pitched to you a movie about a robot who doesn't talk, and there's basically no other characters in the movie. No dialogue, no nothing. You would say, what are you, insane?
Right.
But the movie did really well because it was done really well. So yeah,
good.
any concept can be executed well. In terms of the execution of this movie, I will take a pass. I'm in no place to judge this because I could not be less interested in the subject matter. For that reason, I found the first Top Gun torturous to sit through. I found this one pretty torturous to sit through also, if I'm being honest. I just didn't. It's just not my thing. Maybe it's good for what it is. You want to tell me an opera singer is a great opera singer? Okay, I believe you. I can't stand opera. I have no interest in opera, so fine. If you're going to tell me it's good, it's good. I think the action sequences were well enough done. Even the action sequences, though, I find like the difference between a great car chase scene and an average car chase scene is not that big. I've just never gotten off on that. I know the car chase is a staple of action cinema. You know, there are some that are particularly good, I guess, but most of them are kind of middle of the road for me. But again, there's a huge audience for planes and cars and military, right? I mean, that's why the Fast and the Furious franchise did so well. That's why they made 15 of them or whatever the hell they did. People like cars, man. There's an audience for that. And I feel like Hollywood has become very narrow in its selection of audience. And Top Gun, this last movie, broadened that out to the point where, like I mentioned earlier, like my father-in-law never watches movies. He sought this out. He didn't go to the theater, but as soon as it came to, you know, TV or whatever it's on, Paramount Plus, he sought it out and watched it. Like, that is the key to this movie's success, is just broadening the intended audience for the thing in ways that blockbuster movies just don't really do anymore. So in terms of the execution, I mean, like I said, I'm in no spot to judge. I didn't find this particularly entertaining, nor did I the first Top Gun, but I will acknowledge these movies are not for me. I felt the same way about this. I was actually hired at the Intrepid, the Air and Space Museum in New York Harbor. It's a boat. It's a fighter. What do they call those?
It's a battleship.
It's a Navy aircraft.
Oh
carrier.
no, it's an aircraft carrier. That's
yeah.
right. The Intrepid's an aircraft carrier.
Saw a battle during World War II.
And into Vietnam. Into Vietnam.
Oh, in Vietnam. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had all these fighter planes parked on it. And one of the cool things about becoming a tour guide there is they gave the tour guides pretty much carte blanche. They said, okay, you have to start here at this time. You have to end here at this time. Anything you do on the tour is up to you. Learn about all the shit, plan a route, walk around. So it was a cool opportunity, but I learned while I was training, while I was undergoing the orientation, I'm never going to be able to do this because there's so many people, especially the people who go to a museum like that, who just know this military history inside and out.
Interesting.
And
right.
I can memorize a script, but there's no way I'd be able to carry a conversation with someone, which is part of the job of being a tour guide. It's not just to know the script, but to have a broader knowledge of the subject matter so that when people ask you questions, you can volley back. And I'm like, you know what? I'm never going to be able to do this. So I just told them, I'm sorry, this is not going to be a good fit. That's the way I feel with these movies. It's like trying to enjoy them is even a chore because I just could not be less interested in the subject.
There are certain genres that I have a viscerally bad reaction to. Action movies are not one of those genres. It doesn't
mind
really
an action
matter.
movie. I'm talking about this specific thing.
Military
formality, that kind of thing. Especially the apolitical nature of this. Yes, that's part of why it works. But like you said, it is an inherently political decision not to name the country that the mission takes place in because it is a specific plan to avoid any political backlash or any political response to it. That's why it plays like a Navy recruitment ad. That was Tom Cruise's reservation about doing a sequel. So I want to pull this quote up here because this is a quote that Tom Cruise gave in 1990. He said, this is from a Jacobin magazine review of this movie. They pulled this quote. Cruise says, okay, some people felt that Top Gun was a right-wing film to promote the Navy, and a lot of kids loved it. But I want the kids to know that that's not the way war is, that Top Gun was just an amusement park ride, a fun film with a PG-13 rating that was not supposed to be reality. That's why I didn't go on and make Top Gun 2, 3, 4, and 5. That would have been irresponsible. And so the movie does play like an ad. It does play like a recruitment video. The Iceman funeral scene, that looked like a commercial with the sun hitting the flag as they're folding the flag into the triangle. Like that could have been, obviously on TV, they're not going to advertise a funeral to get you to join the army. But that imagery, it looked like marketing. The last scene of the movie, the very last scene, where his girlfriend is waiting at the silver Porsche, which is a throwback to the first movie where it was a black Porsche. That scene where he walks up to her and kisses her in magic hour with the sun hitting them, that looked like a car commercial, right? So like there is a very commercial sort of aesthetic to the film. And given the subject matter, yeah, it does play like a bit of an extended recruitment video at times. Not the whole way through. But there are moments where you're like, oh, yeah, this could be on TV. Like, this could be an ad.
Sure. I would say I thought about that in regards to the movie. The celebration of martial culture and warriors, that's as old as Gilgamesh and probably older. That's in any culture, in any time period, this celebration of war and conflict and the warriors who fight wars and the sacrifices that requires and the dangers and the courage. That's always going to be appealing for storytellers because you have so much of the drama built in, right?
Oh, of course, right.
Fear, overcoming that fear, loss through death in battle, right? All and that's right there.
The central conflict itself is written for you, right? Saving Private Ryan, that's based on a true story. Right. The script, basically in terms of like plot beats, wrote itself
Right.
because it's a true story, and the conflict, who the hero is, who the bad guy is, what the arc is going to be, the obstacles in your way, the rising action, the climax, the falling action. That's often
Right.
just written into it before you
Right.
even start.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know that I can blame it for that. All cultures produce these stories. So this is ours. If anything, it's the element that might make it look like a military recruiting ad comes from the fact that the military looked at these movies and stole that look. I'm saying it originated with the movies, not with the military, who are not the most creative, cinematographic oriented people. So what are you going to do? That's just kind of built in. You want to tell this kind of story, you want to tell it in a visually impactful way.
Sure. And this is not a historical
that ending
war
in
film.
Magic Hour. He gets the girl. Sorry, spoiler alert. He gets the girl. All of that. I mean, that's just hero's journey shit. That's any.
Right, of course.
It doesn't even matter what the genre is. It could be about a guy trying to become the CEO. And that's your typical ending. But that's part of what made it so successful. If they had never stopped making movies like this, while I would argue it is a very well executed version of a movie like this, I don't know that it would have been this successful. It was this successful because, as with your father-in-law, right? Your father-in-law probably sought it out because there aren't 10 movies like it as there were in the 80s.
Right, of course. In the 80s and the 90s, I mean, most movies were kind of like this in the 90s. This was kind of the norm, not in terms of the subject matter, but in terms of the structure, in terms of the presentation, even the music. This had one of those classical orchestral scores, which you never hear anymore. You never hear that anymore. That's something that a lot of people don't notice. Now it's all soundtracks. They take, pre-written songs, or maybe if it's a huge movie, they'll have a big artist write songs for the movie, which this did, obviously, the Lady Gaga song is used in this, but it also had a more conventional classical soundtrack that was written just for the movie, which again, that was a staple of 80s movies and 90s movies. And then starting in the mid 2000s, you just saw that almost go away entirely, and now you almost never see that. And so, yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of little classic sort of Hollywood conventions that are employed here that are not reinventing the wheel in any way. It just feels that way to an extent because we haven't seen it in so long.
That's it. And I think I don't want to convey the idea that Maverick, I don't believe Maverick is successful because of its demographics. I believe Maverick is successful because of its story beats, because it's a very well executed version of a type of film that we don't make anymore for political reasons, for people who have gone into screenwriting, who are educated at top universities where they've been trained in a certain ideology, and that's their sensibility. They're not writing for everybody. If you look at these people like Spielberg, like Lucas, they were from very conventional backgrounds. They weren't from the rough side of the street, but American Graffiti was Lucas's memoir of his adolescence. That's how he grew up in these California suburbs. They understood what people wanted to see, and that's what they endeavored to make. Now, those kinds of movies were never really my favorite. I was always the freak going to see David Cronenberg movies.
Right.
But I appreciated them for what they were. When Hollywood turned around and stopped making movies like that, or tried to have it both ways, where they took the very expensive visual elements, but they threw out what made those stories compelling. And really, this whole thing where this is what really killed them. It's not the swapping, as I demonstrated with Starbuck. That was successful 20 years ago. That's not what's killing them. That's not why Hollywood lost 40% of its value last year. It's because the premises of the politics they've absorbed do not allow them to give these characters real conflicts and real heroes' journeys. That's the problem. It is just not compelling to see someone who's born perfect
find out how perfect they are. Right. Right. Exactly. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, look, you see that's always been my theory, and it's not just my theory, but that's also, this has always been why, like, Superman was never the most successful of the superhero characters and never the most compelling. Of course, Batman, with this tortured past and murdered parents and all this inner conflict and no superpowers, right? He's not bulletproof. That's why he's, of course, a more interesting protagonist than the Man of Steel, who's, can lift a bus with his thumb. I mean, there's no vulnerability there. And that's the key. The hero has to be vulnerable. That scene, and like I said, I mean, this combined, it was really genius from a marketing standpoint because there were all sorts of callbacks, but that scene in the bar where they start singing, goodness gracious, great balls of fire, and that, triggers a flashback for him. And after they, mess around with him and throw him out of the bar, he has this sort of existential moments, and then the girlfriend notices that, and then the fade to black into the next scene. Like, it's just classical Hollywood stuff that we used to see all the time decades ago. But yeah, I mean, he has vulnerabilities in this movie that sort of really make him a sympathetic main character, gives him a place to go that is an inner journey. That's not just him coping with exterior forces that are keeping him from realizing what an indestructible Ubermensch he actually is inside, the way like a She-Hulk thing, Yeah.
Right. Or, Doctor Strange, they did that with, they make it a Doctor Strange movie that really is not about Doctor Strange's journey. It's about America Chavez, this female Latina character who, again, has to discover how awesomely powerful she is to resolve the conflict of the movie. When they remade Mulan, this is a very notorious example because in the cartoon, she has to use her intelligence to outsmart the men. She's not able to outfight them because she can't match them physically, but she has other gifts and she figures out how to leverage those into being a great warrior. When they went and made a live action version, she basically has the Force. She has some connection to chi. And her problem is the men around her, not recognizing her awesomeness, right? That is really the problem. Now, not only does Tom Cruise have an arc, the supporting characters have an arc. Even the minor ones. Hangman, who has that name because he hangs his fellow pilots out to dry, comes to the rescue at the end. He has a transformation.
That was a good scene. That was a good sequence. Obviously, that was a good action scene.
Tom Cruise made all the actors go to aeronautics school for 3 months that he designed, and they flew. That's not CGI. They're actually flying. That's why it looks so good. Mm-hmm. They had to take training in aeronautical evacuation because they literally were flying over water in case they crashed. So that's a bit. So look, credit where credit is due. They went the extra mile to make this visually incredible version of this type of a movie. Obviously Rooster goes on a journey, the son of the dead Goose. For the Maverick's wingman who died in the first movie. And he's overly cautious, and that's his journey. And he has to have that moment. Is this all conventional stuff? Yeah. The moment of peak conflict where the person has to resolve their inner thing. But you know what? It's a cliche because it works. It works. No matter how many times you see it, if it's done well, it's going to suck you in. It's going to entertain you. If the actors are engaging, if the characters are sympathetic, watching them go on this journey and overcome their obstacles is just going to suck you in. It's something about the way our monkey brains work and process stories. There's a reason that this is how movies are made. And it's not that you can't play around with it a little bit. There are these classic reviews from Red Letter Media where they broke down why the Star Wars prequels didn't work. These reviews are in 10-minute increments. They end up being about as long as the movies themselves. But in one of them, he says, he talks about this typical protagonist story, you know, start out with the person down on their luck and they have to overcome these obstacles. And he says, I'm not saying every movie has to be like this, but unless you're David Lynch, Jim Jarmusch, Francois Truffaut,
Right.
David Cronenberg, if you're making this kind of a movie, it's probably best not to stray too far from that formula. So this is the problem. They're taking premises that really belong in an art movie, and they're trying to put them in movies like this.
Right.
And
Trying
those
to make
two
them
things,
mass marketable.
right? Those don't go together because that doesn't have broad appeal. You're trying to make art house films with blockbuster budgets and aesthetics.
Yeah, and even in most art house films, it doesn't work. That's why nobody sees most art house films, because most
doesn't
art
work
house
for most
films
people.
are not very good. I prefer a great art house film to a great blockbuster film, but that's why the great art house films are few and far between, because it's not easy to make unconventional ideas work. If it were, they wouldn't be unconventional ideas. Everyone would do it.
Everyone would do it. Exactly. How many people go and watch IFC?
Right, exactly.
You got your Disney Plus, you got your Netflix, you got your Amazon Prime. Who the hell is subscribed to IFC?